Welcome to Darkpast. Tonight's tale opens with a man forced to flee for his life. Comment where you're watching from as the MidnightGauntlet begins. The night they selected was moonless, the kind that made even known ground feel strange. Clouds hung low, hiding the stars, and the air felt damp and heavy on the skin. They brought him out after supper, hands tied loose enough to pretend mercy, tight enough to remind him who decided how far he would go. Torches burned dim, not to guide him, but to enjoy his fear. Laughter rolled through the men as they formed a wide circle, horses stomping, dogs pulling hard at their leashes. They called it a gauntlet. He stood barefoot on the cold earth, chest rising slowly, eyes lowered. He had learned long ago that stillness disturbed men who fed on panic. The leader, a man with a voice shaped by control and cruelty, leaned forward in his saddle and explained the rules as if they were a favor. Run until the horn sounds. If you are still alive when it does, you live. If not, well, he shrugged with a smile. Accidents happen in the dark. The rope dropped away. The horn blasted once, sharp and harsh, and the man ran. He did not rush wildly. He moved at a steady pace, breath calm, feet finding ground more by memory than sight. The men jeered at first, expecting him to trip, to fall, to thrash like someone who had never learned to read the night. Horses followed, not too close, the chase like a cruel show. Dogs were released with loud cries, their howls rising and falling as they caught his scent. He led them into the trees. The forest swallowed the torchlight quickly. Branches locked overhead, and the path shrank into a strip of shadow. Roots rose like knuckles. Stones waited where ankles could twist. The man adjusted his pace, letting his steps fade, then return, then fade again, a rhythm meant to confuse. He turned left where the ground dipped dangerously, then cut right through a patch of young pines that bent and sprang back, hiding his path. Behind him, the hunters cursed as a horse slipped. A dog yelped, its scent trail broken by a shallow stream he crossed without slowing. He knew the place where water ran thin over stone and left nothing behind. He knew where the bank would crumble if stepped on wrong. The horn sounded again, far away, impatient. The men laughed louder, but the sound began to crack as the night grew deeper. They believed the game belonged to them. They believed the forest was just scenery. He ran until the ground began to rise, his lungs burning just enough to keep the act real. Then he turned sharply and slipped into a narrow gap between boulders, pressing himself flat, counting his heartbeats. Dogs rushed past, noses high, their speed carrying them forward. He waited until the sound of them stretched thin, then moved again, going back along his own path, careful to step on stone, to brush bark where scent would scatter. Minutes passed, then more. The forest listened. He reached the first mark, a fallen oak he had split months earlier, with iron wedges stolen and hidden beneath it, beside a narrow trench carved by rain. He loosened the support with practiced hands and moved away. When the leading horse struck the weakened ground, the earth shifted and dropped. The rider thrown forward, his curse cut short by a heavy fall. Chaos broke out. Horses reared, dogs tangled their leads. The man did not look back. He moved deeper now, where the trees grew older and the undergrowth thinned. He slowed to a walk. The night felt different here, tighter, as if sound carried weight. He placed a hand on a trunk, feeling for a faint mark he had carved long ago. He turned where the land dipped, and the wind shifted, carrying his scent away. A shout cut through the dark, then another. The horn blew again, sharp with anger, then went silent. The men were no longer laughing. He reached the second mark near a cluster of cedars, where the ground dropped into a hidden pit covered with leaves. He had not built it alone. Others had helped quietly when helping was dangerous. He moved along the edge, pulled a line, and waited. A dog jumped and vanished with a short cry that ended too fast. Silence followed, thick and heavy. Panic spread among the hunters. Orders overlapped. Torches flared, then shook. Someone fired into the trees, the sound loud and wrong. The forest gave no reply. The man climbed using roots like steps, his breathing controlled. From above he watched torchlights scatter like frightened insects. He felt no joy, only focus. This was not revenge yet. This was preparation. At the ridge, he paused and listened. He heard them arguing, voices sharp with blame. He heard the dogs whining, confused. He heard the forest settling again, taking back what had been disturbed. He moved along the ridge, careful to keep the wind behind him. When he came down, it was into a darkness so deep it felt solid. There he waited again, counting, measuring. He had learned that men hunting men revealed themselves in sound before sight, in breath pushed too hard, in boots scraping in the faint clink of metal. A torch appeared, then another. 2 hunters moved together, trying to seem brave. He stepped out behind them and struck once, clean and exact, the butt of his weapon hitting a temple. The second turned, mouth opening. The man slipped aside, letting the forest hide him again. A scream broke out, wild and short. By the time the horn sounded for the last time, the hint of dawn was a pale line on the horizon. The men gathered close now, backs to trees, fear clear in their eyes. They called his name, then called him prey, then begged for the nigh dot to end. From the shadows, the man watched steady as stone. The gauntlet had done what it was meant to do, just not for them. Midnight had passed, and the forest had accepted his offering. He did not run anymore. Dawn did not come all at once. It crept into the forest in thin gray lines, touching bark and leaf without warmth. The men, still alive, felt it before they saw it. A slight easing, a promise that the night's cruelty might fade. They stood close together, torches burned down to weak smoke, horses gone, dogs either dead or missing. None of them spoke. Words had become risky. Every sound felt like a signal. From higher ground, the man watched with the patience of someone who knew waiting was power. He had not slept. He did not need to. His body held a sharp awareness that came when fear was controlled, not obeyed. The forest around him had returned to its rhythm, birds testing the morning, insects moving again. But the men below no longer fit that rhythm. They seemed wrong and loud, even in stillness. He moved as the light grew, not toward them but around them, circling wide, letting his presence be felt without being seen. A twig snapped here, a shadow moved there. He wanted them to know he was still near. Panic made men careless. Carelessness made endings quicker. One hunter broke first. He ran from the group, rushing downhill, shouting for help that would never come. The others froze, unsure whether to follow or stay. The man waited until the runner reached the low ground, where fog lay thick and damp, then followed calmly. He did not rush. He let the man wear himself out, lungs burning, boots slipping on wet stone. When the hunter fell, the man did not strike right away. He stayed just out of sight, letting fear grow, letting silence press in. Only when the man began to cry did he step forward. One strike, clean, final. He pulled the body into the brush, not out of kindness, but out of habit. The forest respected order. Back near the ridge, the remaining hunters argued in low, bitter voices. Blame passed between them. Someone spoke of turning back. Another said there was no turning back anymore. They had crossed a line when they made a man's life a game. Once crossed, such lines disappear behind you. The man listened, fixing their voices in his mind. He chose the loudest next, the one trying hardest to sound brave. He approached from above, using height the way water uses gravity. A stone rolled down, pushed on purpose. A head lifted. A rifle started to rise. Too slow. The man hit from behind, driving the hunter into the ground. The rifle slid away. He knelt, breathing calm, and whispered something the hunter would never repeat. Then it ended. Fear sharpened among those left. They tried to stay together, backs tight, eyes moving fast. They fired into shadows. Bullets tore through bark and leaves, useless noise. Every shot showed where they were. The man marked them, closing distance when needed, keeping away when patience mattered more. By mid-morning, only 2 remained. They staggered toward a clearing where sunlight broke through, desperate for light, believing it meant safety. The man let them reach it. He understood the lie they believed. In the open, they felt less hunted. In the open, they were easier to see. One dropped to his knees, hands shaking, begging the other to run, to leave him. to survive. The second hesitated, torn between loyalty and fear. That moment was enough. The man stepped into view at the edge of the clearing, no longer hiding, letting them see him clearly in daylight. He looked ordinary in the sun, mud-marked lean, eyes steady. Not a monster, not a ghost, just a man who had learned too much. The hunter, still standing, tried to lift his weapon, but his hands failed him. The other cried openly. The man waited, then spoke, his voice calm and clear. He did not threaten. He did not boast. He told them to leave the forest and never return. He told them to carry the story back, to spread it further than any reward notice. The standing hunter dropped his rifle. He helped the other up. They backed away slowly, never turning until the trees hid them. The man stayed in the clearing until the forest felt balanced again. Then he moved, retracing steps, removing signs, restoring what had been disturbed. By noon, the place looked untouched. Only the ground still remembered. As the day slowly wore on, he moved north, avoiding main roads, slipping past farms, keeping to the thin lines between territories. He did not know how far the story might travel, only that it surely would. Men like those rarely kept quiet for long. Fear loosened their tongues. By evening he reached a familiar creek and washed the blood and dirt from his hands. The water ran dark for a brief moment, then turned clear again. He sat on the bank, letting exhaustion finally take him, just for a short while. When he slept, it was light, his senses alert to every shift and sound. Far behind him, two men would stumble into a town, with wild eyes and broken speech. They would say the forest had turned against them. They would say the hunted had become the judge. Some would laugh, others would listen. And somewhere between doubt and dread, the legend would begin to form. Quietly, like dawn slipping in before anyone could stop it. The forest no longer felt like a place he passed through. It felt like something that moved with him. After the clearing, after the last two hunters fled, shaken and silent, he did not rush north as instinct pushed him to do. He waited. Waiting was what kept a man alive when pursuit became obsession. He stayed hidden through the heat of the day, letting the land cool, letting fear grow. Far behind him, by afternoon the birds had fully returned, careless once more, and the wind carried no human scent worth noticing. Only then did he rise and move again. He traveled through land most men avoided, even in daylight. The trees grew twisted here, their roots exposed like ribs, the ground uneven and misleading. The canopy hung low, muting sound, bending light into dull amber streaks. It was the kind of place where people lost their way without knowing when it happened. He knew it well. Years earlier, when he had been forced to run this same land as punishment, he had learned every harsh curve of it. Pain had been his teacher. As evening came closer, he felt the change before he saw it. Not fear, but anticipation. The forest tightened. Somewhere ahead, men were moving with purpose. Careful men, not drunk on cruelty like the others, but trained, quiet, hired to get results. He slowed, grounding himself, letting his breath settle deep. He did not curse the meeting. Encounters were unavoidable. He climbed onto a rocky shelf and lay flat, eyes scanning through narrow gaps in the stern. Below, three figures moved along a dry creek bed, their spacing measured, rifles held low. They spoke in signals, not words. Professionals. He marked their leader by posture alone, the way the others subtly followed him. These men would not panic easily. They would not run from shadows. They would test the forest before believing it dangerous. He smiled once without warmth. The creek bed was a funnel. He let them enter it completely before shifting position, moving along the higher ground with care, placing his steps where rock would not betray him. This time, he knocked a stone loose on purpose, sending it sliding down the slope. The men froze at once, rifles lifted, silence stretched tight. The leader crouched, signaling patience. Good. Patience could be used. He circled wide, sending where the slope softened, reaching a patch of earth dark with rot and damp leaves. He pressed his heel down slowly, testing the ground. It gave slightly, but held. He moved forward, dragging a shallow line with his foot, then stepped back. When the men moved again, one stepped exactly where he intended. The ground shifted just enough to break his balance. A curse slipped out before it could be held back. In that moment, he moved. He did not strike right away. He let confusion spread. He shifted position again, breaking their sightlines, snapping a branch far to the left. The men turned together. Another sound came from behind them. Fabric brushing against bark. They spun back, firing once, then again. Bullets tore leaves, nothing more. The forest swallowed it all. The first man fell when a length of cord tightened around his ankle, pulling him backward into a shallow pit. He hit hard, breath bursting from his lungs. Before he could recover, the man was there, knee to chest, hand over mouth, pressure exact. The struggle was short, controlled, silent. The other two broke formation, fear now stronger than training. They split without thinking, one retreating along the creek, the other scrambling uphill. He chose the one running upward. Gravity would favor him. He chased just enough to keep the man moving, to keep panic loud. Then he cut sideways, disappearing into cover, racing parallel instead of following behind. When the man reached the ridge and turned to look back, wide-eyed, he found himself alone. He laughed once, sharp and unsteady, relief rushing in too quickly. That was when the blow struck from the side. The last hunter dropped his rifle and fell to his knees, gasping, hands rising before he could stop himself. He did not beg. He stared, trying to understand the man standing before him, mud-streaked, scarred, breathing calm, eyes steady. "You could have run," the hunter said hoarsely. It was not a question. "I did," the man answered. "Enough." He left the hunter alive, disarmed and shaking, pointing him south with a simple motion. The hunter did not argue. He staggered away, fear pushing him faster than pride ever could. Night returned in layers. The man moved again, deeper now, toward a place where the forest opened into marshland crossed by narrow paths only locals knew. He stepped through water to break his scent, used reeds to hide his movement, slept in short pieces, waking at every small change in sound. Dreams came anyway, memories of dogs, of laughter behind him as he ran barefoot across broken glass, of a horn blasting too close to his ear. He woke with his jaw tight, hands curled into fists. By the second night, the stories had already begun to spread. He did not hear them, but he felt their weight. Men talked. Fear traveled faster than truth, and truth traveled faster than orders. By the time he reached the edge of the marsh, he knew the pursuit would change. Fewer men would come, but those who did would be ready. He welcomed that. At the marsh edge, he paused and looked back once toward the dark forest that had carried him this far. It stood indifferent, ancient, patient. He touched the bark of a cypress as he passed, a quiet sign of respect, then stepped into the reeds, the ground pulling at his feet, water cold around his legs. He moved carefully, following the barely visible path that twisted like a secret through the wetland. Somewhere behind him, men would pause at this boundary, weighing fear against reward. Many would turn back, some would continue. Either way, the hunt no longer belonged to them. The night closed in again, and he moved with it. Not prey, not ghost, but something shaped in between. An answer the forest had learned to give when cruelty came too often. The marsh changed everything. Weight, our softened sound, erased tracks, and bent distance until judgment blurred. The reeds cut at his skin, and the mud pulled with slow hunger that punished haste. He accepted it. The marsh demanded respect, and he had learned to give it. He moved where the ground rose just enough to carry weight, where cattails leaned away from the wind and concealed motion. Frogs fell silent as he passed, then resumed again, like a living curtain opening and closing. By midnight, fog began to rise. It came in low sheets, silver under starlight, turning the marsh into a maze of half-seen shapes. He stopped often, listening. The night carried more now, faint voices, the soft clink of metal dulled by water. They were adapting. They had split into smaller groups, sending forward men who moved quietly. Good. Smaller groups were easier to break. He found the first sign at a bend where the channel narrowed, a reed cut too cleanly. He slipped sideways, sinking to his knee, breath steady, and waited. 3 figures appeared slowly, boots wrapped in cloth, rifles held tight. They moved carefully, avoiding noise. The leader raised a hand, and they froze. He smiled without warmth. He had frozen like that once too, years ago, heart racing, waiting for dogs to pass. Memory sharpened him. He let them move ahead, then followed. Not close enough to be heard, not far enough to lose them, until the channel opened into a shallow pool ringed with small mounds. He moved ahead, reaching an old snare he had reset months before, cord dark with mud, stakes driven deep. He tested the tension once, then again, then slipped back into the fog. The lead man stepped into the pool and dropped to his waist with a shout that ended as the cord snapped tight, pulling him sideways. The splash sounded wrong in the fog. The others rushed forward without thinking, breaking formation. One slipped and fell. The other fired blindly. The man moved with the sound, closing distance in silence. When he struck, it was quick and final. The body eased beneath the water until the bubbles stopped. He did not stay. He never stayed. The third man dragged himself from the pool and ran, breath tearing from his throat. The marsh claimed him. The thrashing faded, then stopped. The fog swallowed it all. Dawn found him on higher ground where cypress gave way to scrub pine. He crouched beneath a fallen trunk and watched thin smoke rising on the horizon. A larger camp, organized. They had not turned back after all. He considered routes, counted time, measured himself. Fatigue weighed on him now, heavy and constant. He drank from a seep, chewed bark for its bitter edge to sharpen his focus, and waited for full light. When he moved toward the smoke. The camp stood on a rise, surrounded by cut brush, men placed at uneven intervals. He studied their patterns, who walked, who leaned, who looked away too long. He waited for the wind to shift, then crept along the downwind side, using the shadows from the tents. A crate lay partly open near the edge. Salt, pork, powder, rope. He loosened the lid, scattering the contents just enough to create trouble, then slipped away. An hour later, shouting broke out. Accusations. A brief fight. The guard on the east side turned his head. That was enough. The man moved behind him in a blur, dragging him quietly into the shadows. He took the rifle and disappeared again. The first shot came from the tree line, clean and controlled. A man fell near the fire, shock arriving a moment too late. Panic followed. Men running, voices clashing. He shifted position between shots, never firing twice from the same place. Each shot came from a new angle, the sound echoing, confusing them. He did not aim for numbers. He aimed for impact. When the camp tried to regroup, he broke it again. A Poe Wonder keg blew up with a heavy thump that knocked men down and sent sparks into the canvas smoke. Grew thicker. Shouts turned harsh. Someone screamed for retreat. Another yelled to hold the line. He let them argue, letting fear do its work. He pulled back as quickly as he had come, slipping into the pines, then heading toward the marsh, where the ground erased all traces. He paused only to watch the camp fall into chaos, men scattering in groups, leaders losing their voices in the noise. He felt no joy, only a hard sense of balance restored. By nightfall he reached a place he had not seen in years, a circle of stones by a spring, hidden under hanging moss. He knelt and pressed his forehead to the cool rock, breathing slowly. This had once been a refuge, shared with others who learned the land the hard way. Some had made it north, some had not. He left a mark there now, small and careful, a sign meant for those who knew how to see it. Sleep came in broken pieces again, disturbed by the creak of branches and the distant bark of dogs that would not come closer. He dreamed of running with no horn behind him, of a dawn that did not bring fear. He woke before sunrise, joints stiff, resolve steady. The next day he moved faster, trusting rumor to slow pursuit. He skirted a road and saw men arguing with a farmer. He saw the way hands shook, the way eyes scanned tree lines too often. The story was spreading. It would spread even further. At a creek crossing he found fresh tracks that were not hunters. Bare feet, careful steps. He followed them upstream and found 3 people hiding beneath an overhang, a woman and 2 boys, hollow-eyed and exhausted. He gave them food, pointed them toward the spring and the mark, and showed them how to move at dusk. He did not stay. Staying brought danger. As night fell, he crossed into hills where the forest thinned and the ground rose. The air cooled. He climbed until the marsh lay behind him like a dark memory, and the pines whispered different secrets. He stopped at a ridge and looked back once more toward the lowlands glowing faint with distant firelight. He knew they would keep coming, some of them. He also knew they would come differently now, slower, quieter, afraid of the dark. He turned north and moved on, carrying the night with him, leaving behind a trail that could not be followed and a lesson that would not be forgotten. By the fifth night, the hills gave way to harder country. Stone replaced loam, and the forest thinned into long stretches of scrub and wind-bent pine. Sound carried farther here, moving on clean air, and mistakes echoed. He adjusted without thinking, stepping lighter, choosing routes that kept him above soft ground. The land felt less forgiving but more honest. It did not pretend to hide you. It forced you to hide yourself. Below a narrow ridge he spotted movement at dusk, lantern lights swaying in careful gaps. Not hunters in chaos this time. These were men who had learned. They moved in pairs, spacing measured, rifles ready but held low. He counted 6, maybe 7, and marked the leader by the way the others looked to him before each step. The leader wore a long coat despite the heat, posture stiff, discipline held like armor. He pulled back uphill, letting them find signs that were meant to be found. A scuffed stone, a snapped twig, just enough to draw them along the ridge where the wind favored him. He moved quickly there, breath steady, legs burning, the sharp edge of exhaustion softened by purpose. At the saddle between 2 rises, he stopped. The ground narrowed, dropping steeply on both sides. He knelt and loosened stones he had set earlier months ago, when he first knew this path. Might matter. He tested them with his foot, felt the shift, then slipped back into shadow. The hunters arrived in full darkness. Their lanterns painted the stone in dull amber, turning edges soft and dangerous. The leader stopped them, raised a hand, and listened. He waited. He almost smiled. Almost. A stone slipped under a boot. Another followed. The fall began with a sound like rain. A man cried out as he dropped, vanishing into the dark. The others cursed, scrambled, tried to pull back. The man rose behind them and struck the lantern from the leader's hand. Darkness rushed in, sudden and complete. Panic finished the rest. He did not chase the ones who fled downhill. Gravity would deal with them. He moved after the leader instead, who had not run but dropped to one knee, rifle raised, breathing steady. They faced each other in darkness, so close they could smell sweat and leather. The leader fired. The shot missed. The man closed the gap in a breath and drove his shoulder forward, knocking the rifle aside. They struggled, boots scraping stone, balance thin and fragile. The leader was strong, trained. He tried to throw the man using weight and skill. The man used timing. He waited for the shift, then twisted, sending them both down. They rolled and stopped inches from the edge. The leader froze, eyes wide, realizing where he lay. The man stood and stepped back. He did not need to finish it. The land would. The body made no sound when it fell. By dawn, the ridge was quiet again. He moved on. Ribs sore, hands scraped raw. He wrapped them with cloth torn from his shirt and drank carefully, letting pain sharpen his focus. He welcomed it. At midday, he reached a valley where smoke rose in a thin, steady line. A homestead. He kept his distance, but a child's laughter drifted on the wind, bright and unafraid. He slowed, tired. Hunger pressed hard now, a dull ache that ached mistakes. He waited until the sun leaned west, then approached from downwind. An old woman stood at the edge of the yard, eyes sharp despite her age. She watched him without surprise. "You're the one," she said softly. He did not reply. She nodded as if that was enough. She placed bread and water on a stump and turned away, giving him respect by refusing to stare. He ate quickly and thanked her with a look. She pointed toward the hills beyond the valley. "They will not come there," she said. "Too many never returned." He nodded once and left as quietly as he had come. Night fell cold in the higher ground. He built no fire. He listened to wolves test the dark and answered with silence. Sleep came deeper this time, dreams fewer. When he woke before dawn, the ache in his hands had settled into a steady throb. He could work with that. The next ridge gave him sight of a river, wide and fast, its surface catching early light like a blade. Crossing would be dangerous. Staying would be worse. He followed it upstream, searching for the place where stone rose through the water like stepping bones. He found it by mid-morning and crossed with care, balancing slowly, letting the current guide his steps. On the far bank he found tracks, many and fresh. A group had passed through recently, moving north, not hunters, families runaways. The sight steadied him in a way he did not expect. He followed the tracks a short way and left signs he had learned long ago. A bent reed, a shallow mark cut into bark. Help lay ahead. Danger too, but not alone. By afternoon the sky darkened with coming weather. He welcomed the rain. Rain erased the stories men tried to leave with their boots. Rain made things equal. When the storm broke, it came hard. He moved with it, slipping through brush, letting the downpour cover his sound. Somewhere behind him, men would curse and lose the trail, arguing about turning back. Somewhere ahead, others would read his signs and move faster. By night, he reached a stand of beech trees and stopped. He looked at his hands, scarred and slightly shaking now, and let the tremor pass. He was not finished. He would not be finished for a long time. The land had changed him, but it had not taken him. And as thunder rolled across the hills, carrying his footsteps into nothing, the truth settled deep and clear. The hunt no longer belonged to those who paid for it. The storm stayed with him through the night, moving with his steps like a silent ally. Rain pressed the grass flat, softened the earth, erased the language of pursuit. By morning the hills steamed under a pale sky, and the world smelled fresh, as if the land itself had chosen to begin again. He moved slower now, not from weakness but by choice. Speed drew eyes. Stillness, when chosen, became invisibility. He reached the edge of a small settlement by midday. Nothing more than a few cabins clinging to a bend in the river. Smoke rose straight and thin, a sign of calm weather and careful lives. He did not go in. Places like this cut both ways. Kindness lived there, yes, but so did fear, and fear spoke too much. Instead, he watched from the trees, noting patterns, who came and went, who looked toward the woods, and who never did. By afternoon the sound reached him before the sight. Dogs, not wild, trained and controlled. Their calls were low, steady, spaced with care. He counted 3, then 4. He felt no panic, only a tightening like a bowstring pulled back. These men had money behind them, patience and skill. They would not rush. They would wear him down slowly if allowed. He turned north, then west, doubling back in a wide arc that carried him along the riverbank. He waited upstream for nearly a mile, feet numb from cold, before climbing out where clay banks rose steep and slick. He spread mud along his calves and arms, hiding his scent, then climbed into a stand of birch, their pale trunks reflecting light and breaking depth. There he waited. The dogs came first, noses low, bodies tight. Their handlers followed at a distance, rifles slung, voices quiet. He studied them through the branches. One man carried a horn but did not lift it. Another held the leash loose, trusting the dog's control. Good hunters, and that made them easier to read. He slipped behind them without a sound, and moved in a wide circle, then struck the hand holding the leash with a thrown stone that crushed the fingers. The dog broke free, confused by pain and sudden chaos. Gunshots cracked through the air, splintering bark. He shifted again, quicker now, using the noise to cover his movement. When the second dog rushed in, he let it come close, then stepped aside at the last second, driving a sharpened stake into the ground where it landed. The animal's cry ended abruptly. The third dog turned and ran, fear stronger than its training. The men spread out, shouting curses. One climbed up the bank. Another stayed low, trying to read tracks that were no longer there. He chose the one who stayed low. He came in from the water's edge, using glare and reflection to hide his motion. When he rose, he was close enough to startle the man, the rifle knocking against his shoulder. The strike came before a shot could fire. He lowered the body carefully, breathing calm and steady. The last hunter did not run. He stepped back slowly, eyes wide, weapon shaking in his hands. "You don't have to do this," he said, his voice breaking. The man watched him, measuring every movement. He gave no reply. Silence worked harder than any words. The hunter turned and fled, stumbling, disappearing into the trees. By evening, the settlement hummed with rumors. He heard them carried on the wind, whispers, half-formed names, fear growing sharper with each telling. He moved on before curiosity turned into courage. The river widened ahead, slow and deep. He followed it until dusk, then crossed where reeds formed a narrow bridge of tangled roots. On the far side, he found what he had been hoping for. Signs others would overlook. Bent grass, a strip of cloth caught high on a thorn. He followed with care and found a small camp hidden in a hollow. 3 men, 2 women, and a child no older than 10. They froze at the sight of him, fear rising, then easing as they read his posture, his empty hands. He shared what he knew without ceremony, which roots had been burned, where dogs had been used, where water could break a scent. He did not stay long. Staying turned guidance into dependence, and dependence meant death. Before leaving, he gave the child a small token, a smooth stone marked with a shallow cut. "If you see this," he said softly, "you are close." Night fell clear and sharp. He climbed to higher ground, where the wind combed the grass and the stars cut through the clouds. From there he could see torches far behind, scattered and uncertain. Fewer now, always fewer. He felt the weight of it then. Not guilt, not pride, but consequence. Each step forward closed doors behind him. There would be no quiet life waiting, no place untouched by the story that followed him. He accepted it, as he had accepted hunger and cold and pain. Some truths could not be carried lightly. Near midnight, he reached a stand of old oaks and stopped. He leaned against one and closed his eyes, counting breaths, letting the tremor in his hands settle. The night listened, and he listened back. Somewhere an owl called. Far away, a horn sounded once, then went silent. When he moved again, it was with certainty. The path ahead bent toward mountains whose names he did not know, toward colder air and steeper climbs. Men would follow until fear outweighed gold. Some would die, some would turn back. The land would keep its secrets. He vanished into the dark, leaving nothing that could be followed. Carry forward, a lesson written not only in blood, but in the long memory of places that had learned how to protect their own. The mountains made themselves known before he reached them. The air thinned and sharpened, holding a cold edge even at dawn. Pines grew closer together. Their needles covered the ground so thickly that footsteps disappeared almost as soon as they were made. Rock replaced soil, and streams carved deep, fast channels that spoke without pause, hiding all sound. This was a land that punished carelessness and rewarded patience. He felt his breath slow, his body adjusting. He had been moving toward this place longer than he realized. By midday, he sensed he was no longer alone. Not pursuit this time, not in the way he knew it. This presence felt older, quieter. He stopped beside a granite outcrop and listened until the shape of it formed in his mind. Someone watching from above, someone who knew these paths as well as he did. He did not reach for a weapon. He raised his hand slightly and waited. A figure stepped out from the trees uphill, an older black man, gray hair tied back with cord, rifle resting easily across his chest. His clothes were worn and patched, his eyes sharp as glass. He studied him without hurry, then nodded once. "You move like you learned the hard way," the man said. "So did you," he replied. They shared no names. Names were risks. They sat on opposite sides of the rock and ate in silence, listening to the mountain breathe. The older man spoke first, voice low. He told of routes through high passes, of valleys that hid people instead of exposing them, of men who came hunting and never learned twice. He spoke of others too, women who shot straighter than most men, families who moved only when snow melted, children raised to read moss and shadow. "You can stay," the man said at last. He shook his head. "I draw fire." The older man gave a faint smile. "Fire burns fast up here." They parted before dusk, each taking a different path. The knowledge they exchanged was worth more than any weapon. As he climbed higher, the weather shifted. Wind tore at him, sleet stinging his face, visibility shrinking into gray. He pushed forward until his legs trembled, then found shelter under a leaning slab of stone. He stayed there through the night, conserving heat, counting breaths, letting the storm wear itself out. Morning came with a sharp clarity that almost hurt. The world stretched wide and clean below him. Ridges layered like waves, valleys drowned in cloud. He felt small and free at the same time. He moved along the mountain's spine, keeping to the sheltered side, descending only when needed. By afternoon, he heard them again. Dogs, fewer now, 2 or 3, far below. Their sound climbed slowly, uncertain. He gave a grim smile. The mountains would teach them. He led them along a false trail, doubling back across loose stone, where every step erased itself. He crossed a narrow ledge, slick with meltwater, then climbed sharply upward, hand over hand, fingers burning. At the top he waited. The dogs reached the ledge and hesitated, confusion rising in their voices. One slipped and fell, its cry cutting off far below. The others went quiet. He moved on, faster now, heart steady. Near a high meadow, he found tracks that made him stop. Bare feet, small and careful. A child. He followed them to a patch of fur, where a woman crouched with 2 children, fear written clearly across her face. He raised his hands, spoke gently, told them to listen. He showed them how to step on rock instead of grass, how to move when the wind rose, how to drink without leaving signs. He did not stay. He never stayed. Before leaving, he pointed toward a notch in the ridge. "There is a place," he said. "Follow the cold air at night." As he turned away, the oldest child looked at him with something close to awe. He felt the weight of it settle on him and pushed it aside. Legends were traps. The dogs did not follow beyond the meadow. He descended into a narrow valley, steep walls rising on both sides. A river ran through it, loud and fast. He crossed it twice, then a third time, letting the current carry away what scent remained. When he climbed out, he burned a strip of cloth and scattered ash along the bank. Old habits, useful ones. Night came early in the valley. He climbed until the stars returned, cold and bright. Somewhere behind him, men would argue about turning back, about cost and loss, about whether any reward was worth this. Some would continue anyway. Pride weighed more than gold. He found a cave near the tree line and slept deeply for the first time in days. Dreams came, but they were softer now. Running gave way to stillness, to standing ground without fear. He woke before dawn, rested in a way he had not felt in years. As the sun rose, he stood at the cave mouth and looked north. The mountains stretched on, vast and indifferent. The hunt was thinning, stretching, losing shape. It was not finished. It might never be, but it had changed. He turned and walked into the high country, carrying the knowledge that here, at least, the land did not belong to those who chased. It belonged to those who learned how to listen. The high country quieted everything. Sound faded, until even thought seemed to echo. Days passed without markers. He moved by sun and wind. By the way frost lingered in shadow and melted first along stone. Hunger came and went, settling into a dull companion. He learned where to set snares for snowshoe hare, where to find roots that tasted of iron, and kept strength in his legs. The mountains offered no mercy, but they offered balance. He felt the end before he saw it. Not the end of movement. He would never stop moving, but the end of pursuit. It came as an absence. No horns, no dogs, no voices carried on the wind. He waited for it to break, but the silence held. He stood on a ridge at dawn and looked back across valleys and passes, each one carved into muscle and bone. Those who had followed had turned back or fallen away. Pride had finally bowed to fear. He descended into a basin surrounded by granite walls, where meltwater gathered and grass grew thick and green. Smoke curled faintly from a line of trees. He approached carefully, showing himself from a distance, hands visible. A woman met him halfway, steady and watchful. They traded no names, only knowledge. Others lived there, families, loners, people who moved like weather and vanished like breath. They gathered only when needed. He stayed 3 nights, long enough to rest and mend what needed mending, not long enough to be remembered too clearly. On the 4th morning, he left before dawn, taking little and leaving less. The passage north was narrow and unforgiving. Wind scraped it clean, ice coating the stone. He crossed slowly, never looking down. When he reached the far side, he let out a single breath of laughter, the sound lost to the wind. It felt like crossing a line that could not be seen. Snow came that night, soft and steady, covering everything, erasing what had been, and writing something new. He moved through it with care, following what he had learned. The cold bit deep, but it also sealed the past behind him. Even if anyone dared follow now, the land would refuse them. Time blurred. He hunted, moved, rested, then moved again. He crossed into valleys without fences, climbed ridges without names. Once he saw smoke in the distance and turned away. Another time, he found old traps rusted into the earth and dismantled them. A quiet kindness. At the edge of AFF, Rosen Lake, he stopped. The ice was clear enough to see stone beneath. He knelt and pressed his hand against it, feeling the cold bite through skin. He thought of rivers, forests, and all the paths that had closed behind him. He thought of those who would never reach a place like this, and of the small signs he had left behind. When he stood, the choice felt light. He would not become a shadow that frightened children, or a story that pulled fools north to die. He would move when needed, be still when it mattered, teach when asked, and disappear when required. The land had given him that much. Spring came slowly, then all at once, breaking ice and filling valleys with rushing water. He moved with it, down into green places, then back up when tracks grew too many. Years passed, or maybe it was only seasons. It did not matter. Stories would spread of a man who came out of the mountains with winter in his eyes and left nothing but silence. Others would say he never existed at all. He did not correct them. One evening on a ridge, he paused and looked back, not at where he had been, but at what he had become. The mountain stood as it always had. He touched the stone once, a quiet acknowledgement, then turned away. The night closed in, bright with stars. He moved forward without haste, unmarked and unclaimed, carrying the understanding that the hunt had ended not with a final strike, but with the quiet truth that some men could not be taken, and some places would always remember how to keep them safe.